try to give a context so that we understand what we're trying to achieve in the Spirit through this very physical, concrete exercise we'll be doing this afternoon. We're trying to implement the words of the Lord that we've been hearing not only through these days, but through these years, these signpost messages of how God's called us from the time of that first covenantal wave to the present time, that we would be called to be engaged in missional innovation, and that we'd go to the alls and the everys. And so we're in a new season, and it has some very practical implications for each one of our ministries. God calls us to look to where we're not. I remember years back, pretend they are not here. I want your eyes, okay? Stay with me. I love them. They're actually marvelous people. Love on them later. We ran one of the early LTSs, field-based LTSs in Pune, India. And we had created flags of all the countries represented there, which was a magnificent number. There were more students from more nations than any YWAM U of N school up to that point in time. And we were so delighted they had this hall in the YMCA there in Pune, all decorated with the flags. And Lauren was not there the first week. We'd had celebrations and prayer and worship. And Lauren came about 10 days later, and then we wanted to do something to welcome him and introduce him to the whole of the school. And we showed him the flags, and we were so excited about what God was doing, because this was like the most diversity ever assembled under one YWAM roof. And Lauren stood up and said, I want you to look at these flags. And we all smiled like, he's good. He appreciates all the work we've put into this. He says, now I want you to look at all the flags that are not there. So our deep joy and affirmation was about 3 seconds long. As is appropriate. At first I felt, give it at least 5 seconds, please. But our heart, this is what really has called us. We're not to look backwards and just celebrate what has been accomplished. There's a lot of richness, and we love affirming one another and encouraging one another and saying, well done. And they'll look around this room, and I can have so many friends, and I can say, well done, well done, well done. But God calls us into that which is new. And so He's brought us together because of a vision in June of '56 that continues to impact. It was Lauren's encounter. It has become our encounter. Just like God first spoke to Abraham, but then spoke it again to Isaac and to Jacob and to others. And each successive generation made that covenant their own. And they said, yes, we will embrace the implications of this word of the Lord. And we've added to it and enriched it and deepened it and broadened it. And we're still just beginning. Friends, we want to see a movement, not because it has the YWAM nomenclature on it, but a movement that will just move us forward into the future, because God has a dream that is yet unfulfilled. And as long as He cares about the last and the least and the lost, we must care. This is how we love Him. You know, true love is learning to find out, to discover the dreams of your beloved, and then living to make those dreams a reality. We knew that when we romanced each other in a young man to a young woman in the courtship. They find out what kind of flowers they like, what kind of colors they like, what kind of situations they like, and you try to create that situation for your beloved. Our beloved, our great King, our kind Father, our loving Lord. His dream is that all all will be saved. That dream has not been fulfilled. People have free will. He will not ignore their choices, but he wants to make sure that everyone has had an opportunity to say yes or no, and still millions have not had that opportunity. The reason we're talking about this, I used to think of the Great Commission as a task to fulfill. I now think of the Great Commission as how I go about romancing God. Because he cares, I must care. Because it's important to him, it's got to become important to me. It has to change my thinking. It has to change my feeling. It has to change my doing. My head, my heart, my hands, all of me needs to be engaged in this new way. Okay. So what we will do, I think, we've just run this through multiple times this morning, double and triple checking everything. That's right. It's no longer fresh, is it? So we just want to share some of that heart. Then Jill and Min are going to show us some technology. And then if all goes well, we'll be able to start playing together. Well,
it has to change your settings, so
okay.
spacebar moves it through.
What, just spacebar?
Spacebar moves it through.
Okay. I don't see the next one coming up. That's okay. Let's try this. You know, one of our values is we're international and interdenominational. When we rework the values, we need to add cross-platform. I have a PC and an iPhone. I'm a real YWAMer, okay? Let's see how it goes. Okay. Are you with me? Okay, we're going to be looking at this theme, Catch the Wave. We're going to prepare for some Omega Zone adoption this evening, and it's about fruitful Great Commission multiplication. I'm going to start with a story because concepts by themselves aren't sufficient to change us. God embodied the concept of love and mercy and righteousness in the story, in a person. The Word became flesh. So how did 4K begin? It was nannying in 2002. This was at the peak of our misalignment. This was just a month or two after we heard from the Lord heard, we've hit the rock. And that was in a prayer meeting in the Cunningham's home where we were actually praying about the birthing of 4K and some other innovations. And at this meeting, we were still operating in a very organizational, business-like manner. We had the GLT was divided into several different committees who worked offline in between meetings and brought proposals. And I was part of a committee that was chaired by Steve Good. Other members on the committee included Steve Cochran, Al Akamoff, Mark Anderson, Todd Johnson. Who? Dale was there. He was on the committee. I don't remember him ever actually joining a committee event, but yeah. But his prayers undoubtedly made all the difference. And so we were supposed to spread a strategy, and we were given an ending 10 minutes in our agenda. 10 minutes. And so Steve Good said, well, we'd worked on it. We'd met multiple times, and we'd met in Bangkok. We'd met in Kona. We'd met in Virginia. And we had, said, you take this. And what we did at that time is we felt like we just had 4 maps that we wanted to share. And we didn't have any map-making capacity at that time. We actually had to pay $200 to another organization to make these 4 maps for us. And what we had felt like the Lord was saying to us as we were seeking the Lord, because we were aware of this misalignment, trying to move us back in this direction, was this reminders of the alls and everys. And see, we at that point, we were in about 174 nations of the world at that time. And if you took a map of the world and colored it in by countries, almost the whole map was colored in with YWAM presence. Because the ones that we weren't in were like places like Wallace and Futuna, that even if you color them, you don't see them on the map. Okay? So it did make a lot of difference. And so we were feeling like the big boys, and particularly in South Asia, at that point we had about 1,200 staff. And we were one of the largest things in South Asia. And we were feeling pretty comfortable until we got a new map. And we divided the map, this is an omega zones, pre-omega zones, into the districts of India, and said, this is where we had training. This is where we had, the former one was where we had evangelism. And the question is, are those white places, do they need evangelism? Now, even if you've never been in India, the answer would be what? Yes. And we said, this is where we're doing training, and they're even less colored in places. And are there other places that need training? The answer is yes. And how about mercy ministries? Are there street children or people working battling malaria or poverty or need for agricultural development in some of those empty white blank places? Yeah, so when we put it all together, we were in 57 of the 653 districts of India, less than 10%. So we took a few minutes to do that and just illustrate we're not quite as accomplished as we thought. And we began humbling ourselves, and we fell on our faces and on our knees, and we prayed, and that agenda item went on for about 2.5 hours, not talking, not discussing strategy, praying. The shift was beginning to happen because we're getting our eyes off of ourselves and how grand our accomplishments had been, and looking to the Lord and saying, what dreams do you have that are still unfulfilled? Are you with me? That's the story. In Singapore, in 2003, a year later, we launched this in this city, and the themes were all and every, where we're not. These are the things that guide the 4K, and focusing on the least, the last, and the lost. What have we learned? You know, when we just started off, we designed it as a mission strategy tool, and it is a great tool to see where we're not. But, you know, we thought at first when we started working on it that this would just inform our meetings as we discussed the direction. But God did something surprising. We discovered that these maps were most blessed when we used them in prayer. Now, YWAMers have been praying over maps from the very beginning. If you're a YWAMer, you have a fetish about maps, flags, and passports, okay? You love those things. And if you can throw, you know, we just recently had a U of N workshop meeting a couple times ago, and our last evening, we didn't have a program where we said, we'll just put a map out on the ground, and we'll give flags of the nations, and we'll give people banners, and let them loose. And God did this amazing thing. I mean, YWAMers respond because he's placed in us a love for the nations. And so we used to do this in Lausanne the first time, the first SOE, pull out a little road map and everyone get on their hands and knees and pray about it. And that's how YWAM Europe was birthed. You know, Lynn said, I'll go here, and Al said, I'll go there, and that's how it began happening. And now we start saying, let's get big maps where we can walk on it and have hundreds of people. We probably have something like 80 or 90 large maps around the world right now. And what happens, it's just amazing. I stand back and look at it and I go, after all, this is just ink on plastic. But what happens is the map becomes a prophetic platform where people position themselves to hear from God and make commitments back to God. And it's that interchange that delights the heart of the Father. So, you can see, we've had some amazing experiences on maps of all different sizes. And so we've learned this. Not that we learned this in the last few years. We've relearned what God told us from the very beginning. That how do we do strategy in YWAM? It comes out of the place of prayer. If we do strategy as a result of a brainstorming session, guess what? Our good ideas are not sufficient to defeat the powers of darkness. But when we hear from God and listen to His Spirit, and then in obedience co-create with Him, we see the kingdom of God advance. So there's no divide between intimacy and strategy, between presence and movement, between fire and fragrance, between these things that take us into great outward thrust as we come into the place in the Holy of Holies, because that's where we hear and are equipped and move forward with God. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of pictures that could show you of this. But where are we today? Half of the mega zones of the world, 2,000 out of the 4,000, have a majority of Muslims. That's 1,039 mega zones in 67 countries. And Hindus, that's 629 omega zones in 4 countries. And Buddhists, 230 omega zones in 9 countries. You add those together, it's a little over 2,000 omega zones out of the 4,000. Those are the places where God's dreams are most unfulfilled. Those are the ideal places to romance God. 6/7 of all omega zones have unreached people groups. 6 out of every 7. Now they're concentrated in places, and Jill's going to tell you some new things, how you can find those. But because of the diaspora and the movement of peoples across the earth, almost everywhere you go, if you're intentional, you can find people who are unreached, or individuals from people groups who are unreached. 1 out of 7 omega zones has YWAM. You see, put those two numbers together. 6 out of 7 omega zones have unreached people groups. 1 out of 7 omega zones have YWAM. And there's an overlap, just look at that. But there's also a bit of need there, okay? It's time for intentional kingdom growth into those areas where we're not. This showing you a website, www.countforzero.com. Gina Fadley just put this together. It comes out of, in cooperation with the Call to All and the Finishing the Task and the Table 71 movement. There's a movement going Count for Zero. And this is our YWAM version. So the goal is 0 unreached people groups. But they are everywhere people groups are. Unreached people groups live in omega zones. They live somewhere. If your passion is the poor and needy live somewhere, then in an omega zone. If your passion is church planting, people who need a church live somewhere, and they're in an omega zone. If your passion is whatever, fill in the blank. This is a language for us to be able to get to them and reach them. Now, God's doing a new thing in us. We're at this season, we've been hearing it. We experienced it some yesterday in a remarkable way, that he's doing something new for us, preparing us for a great season of growth. Currently, we've had 27 regions around which we function as YWAM. And, okay. And here's some important things for you to be aware of. In those 27 regions, the smallest region has 17 omega zones. That's the Northern European region. The largest region has 971 omega zones. That's East Asia. You can see there's a little bit of disparity between those, okay? The average size of a YWAM region is 154 and something omega zones. But look at the population. The smallest region, this is now the Pacific region, has 16 million people. The largest region has 1.6 billion, 100 times more. And the average population for a YWAM region is over 250 million. How many of you feel adequate to reach 250 million, even with a good eldership team? See, we've got to expand. Isn't that right? It's not sufficient. So we're moving into the future, and what we present today we feel like a stretch for us now, but hopefully they'll feel like in 6 or 7 years, like buckets too small. And we'll be ready for another season of expansion and another period of growth. 5 years from now. Do I hear 4.5 from anyone? 4.5, 4.5, going once. Did I say 4.5? Do I hear 4? 4, you there, 4. How about 3.5? 3.75, right here in front. Okay, to Amsterdam, 3.75, sold.